We'll get started on our next presentation here, and we called this Views of Officials. Let me turn my video on, sorry. Used to being on break here. First, thanks to our three presenters who jumped on today. I think this goes with the theme we talked about of challenges and opportunities a bit, that, you know, as officials, we have different viewpoints of us. I think it's safe to say both good and bad out in the community. And part of becoming a better official is recognizing how you're perceived by others. So we found a group of ornery, cranky folks in general to come on board. But seriously, these everybody we got on here, and I'll talk through everybody's credentials, is someone who's been in the sport a long time, and I think I really value their opinion. First person who's going to speak is going to be Jeff Corbett. Jeff is a former pro road rodder, also team manager, managed United Healthcare team, and also worked with me for a little bit on some of the largest races in the country from Medalist Sports, and has, you know, a broad viewpoint of officials from all sides. Next is going to be Adam Myerson. And as you can see from Adam's picture, he's a multi-time national champion, former professional road and cyclocross racer, and is an event organizer as well. I also raced with Adam for a year, a long time ago, when I was slightly better than I am now at riding a bike. And lastly is Tom Speigel. Tom is actually one of our more experienced mountain bike officials, but the reason I asked him on is he's a longtime mountain bike organizer. As you heard him talking about possibly earlier, has a timing system, does a ton of race logistics, and has worked most of the mountain bike events around. And I will not repeat what's coming over chat, talking about all three of you. It's semi-complimentary. So. But what I'll ask everybody to do is to spend 10 or 12 minutes just giving a good and bad of sort of how officials are perceived in the community from these different groups. I've told a couple of them, imagine you've got a classroom of young, bright-eyed officials, and how are you going to talk to them about how they interact with folks? So we're going to let everybody do just a few minutes and then open it to questions and maybe have a little panel discussion that I'll lead. So I've got us starting off with Jeff Corbett, and let him take over. So Jeff, go ahead. And I think he's frozen already.
All right. Appreciate it. What?
Jeff, you may want to kill your video, get a little more bandwidth.
How's that?
That's better. I may have to skip Jeff.
Put me on, try and get your own things into this.
Jeff, you want to try to get a little better signal, and we can switch over to Adam first?
Copy.
Okay, Adam, go ahead. We'll let Jeff move around and get better signal.
Sure. First, thanks for having me. I've had a lot of jobs in bike racing, but one of the ones that I have not had, probably the only one that I have not had, is as an official. I've done pretty much every other job in bike racing than that. It's a tricky thing that Chuck has asked us to do, because it's some of the I guess what I'm going to try and present is not just my own opinion, but what I have gotten as feedback as a race organizer, as a racer, as a team manager, as a coach, from people's experience with officials, positive and negative. And the negative part's pretty tricky, right? I'm going to get up in front of you and sort of tell you all what's wrong with you, as perceived by the cycling community. That's challenging, and I hope nobody takes any of this personally, and it's not all necessarily how I feel, but might be how people perceive officials. That's the job. It almost would have been better to do this, or easier to do this, if it was anonymous, right? This is the kind of feedback you normally get in like an anonymous feedback form, but now my face is attached to it. So don't shoot the messenger, please. I hope no one takes it personally. The way I decided to structure my feedback is just with bullet points to start with, and then I'll expand on them as little or as much as is needed. But I started with the idea that officials are partners, and I think partners in every aspect of how I participate in cycling, as a race organizer, as a racer, as a team director, as a coach. They're there to help everyone have a positive experience, the positive experience that you want as a stakeholder in whatever way that you're participating. And I think that one is personal for me. I think of the officials as partners in this job of enjoying bike racing. As an event organizer, my second item is I sometimes think of officials as employees or staff. So as an event organizer, I don't think of them as like overseers or administrators. I think of them as part of my event team. And it's important to me to communicate with them early, help them understand the vision I have for my event, and how I want things to be implemented. I might not make the rules, or at least as a race organizer, I don't make the rules. I have another job in cycling where I help make the rules. But in this case, we all have the rules that we have. We know that some things have to be done letter of the law, and other things are to be done spirit of the rule. And the better relationship I have with the officials who've been assigned to my event, better personal relationship I have with them, but also the better professional relationship I have with them, the better experience everyone's going to have at my race, and the better experience that the officials are going to have. So you pay, as a race organizer, you pay the officials. It may be funny to think of them as employees, but that's sometimes a good way to do it. But at least think of them as staff. They're part of your event. Even though you might not have chosen them, they're still part of your staff. The third item I just summarized as police. The officials are your police. And that can be positive and negative, like any police interaction might be. If you want to think of it in a positive way, they can help you with troubleshooting problems as they come up that may or may not be rules oriented, but riders are emotional, all different personalities that you're going to encounter in the world, you're going to encounter at a bike race. And people often care about bike racing a little too much, right? They're passionate, and you have personalities to manage. And you can sometimes use officials as your backup, your enforcers, maybe just an authority. Use them as an authority to help make the event go, or make an experience with an athlete go the way you want it to. Similarly, you can sort of pass the buck to them. You can say, hey, I don't make the rules as a race organizer. This isn't my rule. This is the USA Cycling rule. Talk to the official, right? And your official may or may not appreciate that, but I think they know that that's why they're there, right? So you can, I itemized it as passing the buck, or almost a parental role. Go talk to your mom, right? That's the role that the officials can play for you. Also, a good official will be educational and informative. I might have the interpretation of a rule wrong. I might not be familiar with a rule change. I just might have forgotten something. Or I might be interpreting different, or maybe they're interpreting different. And maybe a rider doesn't understand a rule. So using an official to help explain something to a rider, because we know that riders don't read rule books. Riders don't know the rules. They have feelings. They very rarely are informed with facts. And so you really rely on your officials to come with the facts. And that can help you manage a situation as a race organizer. The negative sides of the police bullet item are officials also have the power to ruin your race. If you get an official who is adamant about doing things a particular way, or has a different interpretation of a rule than you in a way that you think impacts your race negatively, that's a problem. You've got an employee that you don't control or can't control, and now you have a conflict. And that has happened to me as a race organizer. The only time I've ever shouted at someone, aside as a participant, the only time I've ever shouted at someone at a bike race was a race official. It only happened once in 30 years of race organizing. But this particular official was enforcing a rule in a way that shouldn't have been enforced. and was literally actively ruining the experience of my racers in a way that was going to come back on me. And it turned into a standoff, and I pointed and shouted. That's a big deal. It takes a lot, I think, to get someone to that point. Race organization is stressful, of course, but yeah, once in 30 years is a pretty good track record. I think it shows you how big a deal it was. Sometimes officials are bullies. And I split that out as also there's an insecurity. There can be an insecurity there. And this is a personality type. This isn't unique to officials. It's just that we're dealing with officials. So that personality type, if you have someone who is insecure or a bully and has taken on the work of officiating, that's not a great match, right? That can lead to behavior that can negatively impact your experience as a racer, as a race organizer, because you've got someone who wants to impose themselves over you in a way that's related to a personality type. And you're, as a race organizer, you will have those officials. You will absolutely have to deal with that. Related, you get aggressive officials sometimes as part of that. They aren't friendly. They aren't problem solving. They're ego driven, which I split out as another negative aspect. If you have an ego driven personality as an official, you find yourself in a situation where what you've got is a wannabe cop, right? Now you don't have a police officer here. Now you've got a wannabe cop. Now you've got someone who, for whatever reason, has decided to become an official. And if that is the personality type they are, it comes across in the worst way, where you have someone who thinks they are in charge of your event and everybody should defer to them, and they are going to tell you how your event is going to go. That obviously can ruin everyone's experience and your race. This one's a little hard to present. It doesn't feel good to present this, but sometimes you get officials who, most officials were athletes, but not all of them. And I think that's important to know. You don't have to have been a good bike racer to be a good official. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Or maybe be patient with me with this one because I'm going to qualify it with a positive perspective as well. I'll start with the negative perspective of it. But the negative perspective is if you get someone who, again, is insecure about their lack of success in cycling as an athlete and has turned to officiating as a way to stay involved, that can manifest as a chip on someone's shoulder that turns into bad officiating because of their personal feelings about how far they did or didn't make it in the sport as an athlete. So maybe I'll leave that there and now talk about how that can also be a positive. So my last item, my last major category is item 4 is just officials are generally the people who love cycling the most, right? I love bike racing. It's really my only talent, why I'm here. It's why I've gotten involved in all these different sides of the sport. But like Jeff went on after his racing career to be a team director. When I was presented with the opportunity to team director, I said, no way, that's the worst job in cycling. I want to ride my bike. The thing that I love is riding my bike, and I don't want a job in cycling that keeps me from doing that. So when I think of officials, I think of people who really love bike racing, so much so that they're willing to do this job to help cycling be successful. Maybe it suits their personality. Maybe they have other related jobs in their life where it suits their skill set. But I am personally so appreciative of the officials because I look at that job as a job I wouldn't want to do and that I absolutely need. And it's missing the participation. You don't get to ride if you're an official. You're there all day. You're there the longest. You're there from the start of the day to the end of the day. You're one of the first people there and the last people to leave. People shout at you all day. They don't appreciate what you do. They treat you like you're a parent that they hate. There's very little reward to the officiating job. And so over the course of my career, as a rider, as a race organizer, I just am very appreciative of the officials and came to the conclusion that I don't think anyone loves bike racing more than the officials. They're showing up to do that job. So that's the positive side of being involved as an official. That's my summary. I could go on in each one of those topics, but maybe that's enough to get us started. And Jeff's connection looks really good now, so maybe we can pass on him. But I don't know, Chuck, I guess I'll send it back to you.
Yeah, Adam, thanks for that. And, as I told everybody to start this is challenges and opportunities. I think it's the theme of the weekend. And sometimes it's hard to hear how we're perceived by some parts of the community, but I think there's a real appreciation for officials. And I talked to these three beforehand. I think one thing that summarizes it up, we talked about the cost of officials. I heard a guy we know talking about officials who's an organizer. He said, officials cost too much, but they're not paid enough. And I think that sums it up, is that, the burden on the organizer it's a burden, but at the same time, there's a real understanding that they don't get paid enough. Just officials don't get paid enough. So Adam, thanks for that. We're obviously going to keep you on and open it up for some discussion. Justin, you mind repinning Jeff? He came off for some reason. I think you're on top of it better than I am. And Jeff, you can start unmute and start up on your portion. We'll get you set up on the camera here. Hopefully your connection's a little better. Well, he may have jumped off.
No, I'm right here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you, and you're back up. You sound better. Thanks.
Good. Well, I appreciate what Adam had to say, because that definitely covered some very similar things that I had in my notes, and freed me up to maybe move on to some stuff a little bit further down my list. But first, just thanks for having me. I see a lot of names I recognize, one or two that I actually like. Looking at you, Bonnie Walker. But yeah, Adam covered it well. I mean, you guys are perceived in a myriad of different ways, and and by a lot of different user groups. So since I think Adam covered that well, what I kind of wanted to move on and talk about a little bit was maybe officials putting a little bit more of a customer service element into their jobs, and looking at all the vast array of customers they serve, and it's not easy. You have a very wide customer base here that you're serving, and you have to wear a different hat depending upon which group you're trying to service. From the juniors and their parents, to the local master who, on Monday through Friday, he might be the CEO. And now all of a sudden on Saturday, he's just another guy with a number pinned on. And he's not used to not being in charge. You've got the rookies, Cat 4s and 5s who, don't know the rules. They don't even know where they're going to line up. They need you to be a teacher and a helping hand. And then you've got know-it-all pros who think they know the rule book better than you. And then you got even more know-it-all directors who think, they know it even better. And then on top of all that, you've got your promoters. So you've got all these wide ranges of, customers that you're there to service, and you have to put on a different hat in dealing with each one of them. And then you're bringing, whatever your personal baggage is to the situation, or your personal perspectives to the situations. And then you're bringing also your relationships. There's a lot of people on this call that I have worked with many years, in a lot of capacities, and some quite closely. And you develop relationships, with certain people. Are they, those relationships, be them good or bad, are they leading you to treat things, different customer groups differently? I noticed in the notes, your run a show for today, that later on this afternoon, you're going to be talking about bias, and that bias can be a positive and a negative. The bias somebody might bring to an event I'm putting on, who's had a good experience at previous events I put on, that bias may be beneficial to me. It might help me. I might get away with X, Y, or Z that, a person I don't know or haven't worked with, I can't get away with. Maybe so-and-so's letting me bend the rules, as where, somebody I don't know or haven't worked with, has, and then we all, cycling is a small community. We all know each other, have heard of each other, sometimes work together, cross paths together. So everybody has a reputation that precedes them. So you're coming in with that baggage. So a lot of people on this call, when Chuck was promoting events, probably worked with Chuck. They probably came in thinking, oh, dear Lord, I got to work with this guy. And, and all that baggage. And, it was probably the worst experience of their life. So we can all understand that. But it's a difficult job. And how are you going to balance? How are you going to balance wearing all those hats with all those various customer groups? And I'm more here I'd like to more facilitate a discussion than actually sit here and have answers, because I don't necessarily have the answers of how you guys are going to do all that. But I guess it has to start from a place of respect and understanding where all those different groups are coming from. Where's the promoter coming from? You're driving in the morning of an event, you're going to work that event that afternoon, and then you're driving home. Well, that promoter has lived and breathed and bled that event for probably the last 12 months. They have done everything to put that on. In many cases, it's their livelihood. So, they've got a lot invested in that, as where for you, it might just be a weekend gig. Now, I'm not saying you're out to wreck it or ruin it, but understanding the perspective of where that promoter comes in and how much he or she has invested in that. And the same goes for the different rider groups. How much the local Cat 3 who's driven 20 minutes from his house to do a crit has invested in something may seem, not nearly as much as the, pro director who just, flew across 2 continents to get to your race. But, to that Cat 3, that might be his Super Bowl. I noticed later on in the run a show, Randy Shafer's talking, and he's, the only U.S. official who's worked all 3 Grand Tours, and he's worked the Tour de France. But, everybody's got their own Tour de France. Everybody's got their, so this, it might not be the biggest race in the world to you, but it might be the biggest race in the world to that junior kid or that master's kid. So, I guess having taking a step back, having a moment of perspective on, where these different groups are coming from, what they're showing up at the event with, as far as their intent. Now, all that being said, at the end of the day, is there times you need to be a hard ass? Yeah, absolutely. And, I know that as well as anybody. I'm not sure, Chuck will have to look through the records. I may still hold the record for the most fines ever accumulated. by a director. Some of them record setting, but that's okay. I understand that. And, when you get to that level, when you're racing as a pro or you're directing at that level, you understand that everybody's got their job to do. It's a job, you take it in stride. I think sometimes the people who are here for a recreational purpose, it's sometimes a little bit more challenging for them. They don't have, a race next weekend and next weekend and next weekend and next weekend like the pro does. So again, it's all variations on a theme of knowing your customers, knowing what perspective they're coming in with, and what how to deal with them. And then real quickly, because I want to save time for discussion, there's the other side of that coin. And while you need to know your customers, it's important for you to know that your customers know you as well. All of you have a reputation. Now, the guy who comes to 2 or 3 races a year, he doesn't know you. He doesn't remember you. He doesn't know who was the official at his last event. But the guy who races 20, 30, 50 times a year and has been doing it for several years, he starts to know you. He starts to learn you. The Cat 1 who's been doing this for 20 years, he knows you. The promoter who's been doing this, he knows you. So you get a reputation, and your customers are building a mental file of you. They know you. They know, when I was a director, I knew which officials would look the other way at a sticky bottle. I knew which ones were going to be, busting chops about wearing your helmet to sign in. I knew which ones were going to be heavy-handed with fines, and I knew which ones would prefer to give time penalties instead of monetary fines. I knew there was some that were, total fans of the sport and could, that we could bully a little or convince or manipulate into maybe changing a decision or seeing things our way, right or wrong. But they know you too. So you have to realize, you can't hide behind anonymity either. Your customers, know you, and they have that mental file on you, and they remember you from previous incidents. They remember you from previous events. And they're bringing that perspective with them as well. Overall, like Adam said, we've all had positive and negative interactions with officials throughout our careers, and I think Tom, Adam, myself, we've all been doing this for 30 years or more. I think together we probably have over 100 years of doing stuff in this sport. And so you're going to have all kinds of interaction. Overall, how are you viewed? I think the majority of the people are going to view you, positively, and if not positively, at least with I understand they've got a job to do. But every single person, even though they may have reached that understanding over time, they've reached it by having some negative interactions with officials. There's no way to avoid that, but it's going to happen, and hopefully that's what today is about. You guys learning from mistakes, hearing from coworkers, how to avoid those, and how to better yourself. But I appreciate the efforts you guys put in, weekend in, weekend out, even though I don't always agree with you. So thanks for all you do, and thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I think Bonnie brought up a great point in chat that, and I was surprised with this when Jeff and I started working together on tour to Georgia. He'd moved into the race director side from being a team manager, and I think we got the officials crew assignments. And I shared them with Jeff, and you know, he literally went through and talked about every single official in that crew who he knew. So I think it's a great point for all of us to remember is we get reputations, and those can be really good and those can be not so good. And, you know, cultivating that reputation and that mental file with your stakeholders is something we all need to consider. And that doesn't mean being easy on people. It means being fair and respectful and knowing your stuff and knowing the rules. And I think that's what Jeff and I talked about that very first year, is that this person's hard, but they're fair. And there was respect there for that official. And you know, it's just something we've seen carry through. So thanks. I'm going to come back with a couple of questions. Jeff does hold the record for furthest back in a team caravan ever. I think Sean Farrell did that at Tour de Tuna. He made a mistake. I won't say what he did, but it was pretty bad. And I think you were somewhere between the county clerk and the county dog catcher on the caravan were the next day, which had like 60 people on it. So thanks, Jeff. We'll get back to you. So Tom Speigel is going to talk a little from the mountain bike side. I think this is your first successful Zoom call. So thanks for joining us. And I'm sure the grandkids are on standby to assist if needed. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
I don't click many buttons, but I did learn that I can go left and right and see who else is on the call. So when I went to the right, I noticed that I got to give a shout out to Valicia. Valicia has been my great supporter over the last few years. I know she's way overworked, but I appreciate everything you do to help me get my events off the ground. She does an amazing job, along with Chuck and Justin, but Valicia has been my crutch for the last few years, and I appreciate it.
And now for the rest of you.
So I didn't know there was more people on the call. So I'm learning about this Zoom thing. You go left and right and you got all these people here. So I come from the mountain bike side strictly. I did a little bit of work with some road cycling a long time ago. It is way more complicated than mountain biking. So my dealings with officials have centered mostly around UCI level events. A lot of our local races for a long time, I had a woman that worked for me for years that had an official's license, and Sharon did all the officiating at our races, which was really just, she was the timing person and the official. So the complexity of road cycling would be staggering to me. The simplicity of mountain biking is the beauty of it. So as an official, and as Jeff was speaking, I made it hit in my head that you as an official walk into a situation with a group of people that have been putting their blood, sweat, and tears into putting on an event, and you come in on a Friday afternoon. So that's a challenge in and of itself. First of all, you're the new kid on the block if they've never worked with you before. Secondly, they've got this tight-knit group that sleeps together in a hotel, eats together, drinks beer together, and does all of these things together, and you show up on a Friday. And the first thing you probably want to do is you want to get to work and you want to do your officiating thing, go to registration. But what you need to do probably prior to Friday, and not all officials do this, some do, some don't. I've worked with plenty of great officials that I've known through the years. But as a new official, if you're going to start on Friday, you've made a mistake already. You need to get a hold of that promoter and become part of that team. As you heard Adam and Jeff refer to, you're part of the team. You're part of the structure of the event. You're a stranger when you come in on Friday and you've never had a conversation with anyone from that organization group. So you need to make that phone call far in advance. I'm sure most of you do, because I see faces that are experienced officials. But if you're a new official, reach out to that person, email, kind of try to find out what sort of organization they have. You know, you come to my event, I've been at this longer than anybody in mountain biking, probably over 30 years. And I am a little crusty. I've got people that have worked for me for 30 years. You're not just going to come in here and just be that person that's going to push us around because we've done this a long time. But we want you to be part of our group, but it's hard to when you just show up on Friday and say, hey, I'm here. I'm the USA Cycling official with the blue shirt on. Well, who the heck are you? How about a little pre-event communication? And as promoters, as Jeff and Adam know, we're so busy leading up to the event, we're probably not going to take the time to reach out to you. That's just not going to happen. For me, most of the events I've done over the last 10 or 15 years, I've had officials that I've worked with before. So when Jordy Ma shows up, I've already worked with him. There's Mike Donovan, I've worked with him. So I don't have to reach out those guys. And you'll know your success rate when they invite you to dinner. If you're eating dinner with them on Saturday night or Sunday night, you know you've been successful. So find the way before you get there to figure out how you're going to find out, even if it's calling another promoter and saying, hey, do you know this promoter? Learn a little bit about their organization. Is this guy or girl, is this the first race they've ever done, or is it the 50th race they've ever done? You're coming to Jeff's event and he's done hundreds of them. He's been to thousands of mountain bike races. He's a different cat than if you go to a person that's putting on their first or second race. And if they are putting on their first or second race, you might have to up your game a little bit as far as how involved you are. If they're putting on their 50th or 100th race, you may be that person in the background that does one thing, and that's just be an official. Take care of just the rules. You don't need to be there to run the event. That's not your job. Your job is to assist with rules for mountain biking mostly. I realize, again, road cycling is a little more complicated. But that was an interesting take, I thought, of when Jeff brought up about them and Adam brought up about them being employees. It's just we don't know them long enough before the first time we ever meet them. And I think it would be very important for all of us to spend, even myself as an official, if I'm going somewhere, to reach out and find out about the organization, find out about the promoter, and have at least a 15, 20-minute conversation. What's your expectation of me? Here's my expectation of you. And go through that process in advance. Now, again, I'm sure that a lot of you already do that, but if you are a new official, that would be my hope that you took away from what I've seen and watched with officials. That's part of it. The other thing is, so I'm looking for something negative, but I've had so many positive experiences with officials. I would say that officials that want to exert their influence on every single aspect of the event, that becomes challenging as a promoter. Maybe you don't like my signage. Well, that's the signage I've been using for 30 years. So bug off. I don't have time for that. You don't like that I didn't put a 5K to go sign up. Well, you know what? I forgot. Don't go.
Take a screenshot of Tom
And
while
again,
he's frozen. And where you're back, Tom. Sorry, go ahead. You froze out. You're good.
So you have to look at it. I think if you're mostly road officials, that's just a different deal. As mountain bike officials, I think the one thing that when the rule book was written for mountain biking, it was kept simple for a reason. And just remember, going into an event, a mountain bike event, just keep it simple. It's not rocket science. It's not as complicated as a peloton and cars and intersections. It's in a county park with dirt and dust and things like that. So keep it simple. Learn your promoter before you get there, and make sure when you go to the event, you have figured out what his or her expectation is of you. And hopefully you can let them know what your expectation is of them, because I think it's got to be a two-way street. There is an expectation. You'd like to make sure that registration is going to run smoothly. You have enough staff for it. You're going to have the event timed well. Who is your timing company? That's always a good one, because I'll tell you, the worst thing to do as an official is go to an event where the timing goes bad. How many of you have done that before? A lot of work. So just check those few boxes off before you get there, and I think it'll make your experience with the promoter a little bit more positive. Again, I applaud everything you do, because it's not an easy job to walk into people with a lot of experience like Adam or Jeff or myself and just become part of that family. But for the most part, I think most promoters would rather see you be part of the family and working with us than trying to come in as an adversarial situation, creating waves because you want to exert your influence on us. We don't need to be influenced. We need you to help us out, deal with the Cat 3 rider, the Cat 1 rider that, as was pointed out early, never read the rule book. And don't wave the rule book in their face if you can help it, please. They don't like that. So that's about all I have to say.
Great, Tom. Thanks. Super helpful. And I'm going to open up. I'm going to ask a few questions. And Jeff, go ahead before I move on.
Yeah, just something that popped in my head when Tom was talking, and I will add to both Adam and Tom. Unfortunately, they don't read the rule book because Chuck doesn't send rule books out anymore.
Ah, yes, they don't.
It's available on an easily downloadable PDF from our website for free.
Yeah, we hear that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of people on this call that I know, and a lot of people I've worked with, but some of the best officials I know. I've also who are trying to do some work in the sport outside of being officials. You know, I didn't even remember that Steve Johnson was an official because I worked with him in so many other capacities. I've worked with, Bonnie, Holly, I didn't know Marcel. I didn't know you were an official. Get out and work a bike race, work for a promoter in another capacity. Live the race with them. Go work on their signage team. Go work registration for them. Go, work at an event in another capacity. I think it'll help if, and I'm sure many of you do. So I might be preaching the choir, but it's a way to give you a great perspective of some of the other jobs out there that you can then take back and utilize, in your officiating.
Adam, you want to comment on that? Because besides Adam mentioned it, he's also a member of our cyclocross sport committee, was on the UCI Cross Commission for a little while, and has been really involved in that side of sport as well. So Adam, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. It might be a lot to ask. I certainly think my understanding of the sport comes from doing all the jobs and having experience on all the sides. And it really is, the officiating is the only thing that I haven't done. So, I've had lots of people who want to just come work the race, for instance, because they want to get some experience from the other side of the event. And that's super helpful. So, I think if you're trying to be the best you can as an official, understanding, like someone in the comments mentioned empathy. I think having a lot of experience from other people's perspectives certainly allows you to have greater empathy for them. And then I do think that ties back into the customer service aspect that Jeff hit on right away. I think that's so critical. We're all in the customer service business, and your officials are such an important part of the customer service experience. And so if you think of yourself as having that job, certainly not an easy job, but you probably can do a better job of it if you understand what the customer's experience actually is from having shared it. And I think that makes empathy that much easier.
Adam, let me follow up with a question from you. And years ago, you and I don't know if you remember how to talk. I mean, I know you take your craft as a bike racer super seriously. And at one time we talked about, you can just look at someone who's experienced and is comfortable on the bike and, just knows how to ride it. And I want to talk a little about craft for an official. The perception of the community, and Tom and Jeff, feel free to go in, but, there's nothing that, just knowing your craft and knowing the rules and being knowledgeable, what's the perception between, and some of this may be due to lack of experience, or, people do have to learn, and we're going to definitely talk about that in our next segment after lunch, but what's the perception among you all amongst the, seeing the experience and knowledge of officials out there? Does it engender more respect for you, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you want me to start with that? Absolutely. I think there's a lot of people on this call who have worked my events. And so I think they know like what my approach is, and how much I try to reach out, and I've always really appreciated the officials who've reached out to me ahead of time and sort of been part of my planning process. You know, if they contact me, yeah, on Friday because they want me to change something in my tech guide, that's not going to go over as well as someone who contacts me a month in advance or even 6 weeks in advance to go over things in my tech guide. I think there's a lot of people I could compliment on this call, and Randy's already been named, but I have to say he's such a great example for me, and he's probably one of the officials that I've enjoyed working with most in every way. On you know, in committee meetings at USA Cycling, on personal circumstances or problems I've had as a rider in a disciplinary sense. He just really understands bike racing in a way that allows him to implement the rules according to the spirit of the rule without violating the letter of the law. And I think we have a number of officials, longtime officials at USA Cycling who I think meet that standard. I mean, I was lucky to come up in New England under Diane Fortini. And I think most of you, if you don't know Diane, you've heard people talk about Diane. And probably my respect for officials probably originates with my respect for Diane as a person, as an official. The first race I ever won as a junior, I put my hands up. It was Diane's first race officiating, and she had to disqualify me. She loves telling that story, and so do I, but it just shows you like that how deep those relationships go and how long we've all been sort of working at, yeah, the craft of the sport. That was probably 1988. So yeah, I think I could probably leave it there, but yeah.
Tom or Jeff, you want to comment on that? Just the knowledge and other portion. We joked the years ago that one reason we don't print the rule book anymore is that it fit too easily in the hip pocket, and that was actually told to be one of my mentors is don't carry that rule book around in your hip pocket. Know it, know what's in there and know why it's in there, and just that knowledge is an important thing. As an aside, one of our task forces did point out that we.
Well, I think Tom.
What's that? Sorry. One of our task force did point out, we do need to let new official or new riders know the rules, and that's actually part of that novice race experience that we're going to talk to you all about. But Tom or Jeff, anything to add on what Adam said?
No, I think for me in mountain biking, again,
I think Tom touched on it when.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, I don't know if I'm coming through or not. But Tom said the guy who comes in on Friday and doesn't know anything, hasn't been there working. That's a red flag right there to me that you don't know your craft. If you know your craft, you may still show up on Friday, but you've contacted that promoter. You've talked to them ahead of time. You've made an effort. Yeah, you're not getting paid to spend an hour on Tuesday with a promoter, prior to the event, but it's going to make the experience better that weekend. So, things like that show me right off the bat that, that you know your craft or you take it seriously.
I'd like to, jumping off from that or giving one more example, I see that Urs on the call here, and Urs was my chief at Northampton in 2019, and he contacted me really early. The general example I was giving you is actually a very specific example of help that I received from Urs because he stressed me out because he contacted me early and said, these are all the things you got to fix with your tech guide. But he also said, here's how I suggest that you fix them. And he really improved the quality of my tech guide by going through it with a fine-tooth comb early enough. It was the tech guide from the year previously, but it allowed us to make those changes with plenty of time. And my first defensive reaction was that he was making more work for me. And once I calmed down from that, his input was so good, such high quality input. And he did a bunch of work essentially on my behalf to improve that document. And I was so pleased with what we had as a result of it, and the assistance that he gave me. And he can even show you in that example of how, as a race organizer, you can bristle when the official comes in and tells you how to do things. And sometimes you got to check yourself and say, are they helping me or are they making more work for me? And well, he did make more work for me, but it actually improved the quality of my event. And I really appreciate it. And I'm not sure I ever actually told him that. So I'll say that in front of everybody now, how helpful that was for me.
Great. And thanks, Adam. That's, I'm sure Orr appreciates that. Anybody have any questions? Feel free to put them in chat. We've got just a few minutes to go. And if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, you can't harass or ridicule Jeff. That's the only rule here. People know him too well. But feel free to unmute yourself for a minute and ask any questions you want to.
Except for Dave Folks, he's not allowed to ask any questions.
As we've said, it is a small sport. We know each other, and that's where I was sort of getting at with Jeff was we talked about this previously, but just knowing folks. I mean, it is a small community out there, and one thing I had to learn pretty early on as an official, I started working high level events, and it got brought up is I'm doing this 2-3 times a year, and these team managers and neutral support companies and top riders are doing this every single weekend. So we need to be really on top of it and improving our craft because they're getting to practice every weekend and we're not. That's a big challenge. Anyone have any other questions, comments?
I'll make a comment more along with the mountain bike side. As most of you guys know, most of my experience comes from the mountain bike side, and Tom has experienced this personally. But a lot of times when I am reaching out to the mountain bike promoters specifically on these events, whether it's a UCI race, and this is more so on the domestic new race side of things or the local level, is having the conversation up front of how involved do you want me as an official to be? It's completely different on the roadside, as Tom mentioned, and as you all know, but how involved do you want me coming in as an official wanting me to be? Do you want me to give you feedback on your event, or do you want me to just shut up and sit there and score the race? And as we know with the mountain bike races, a lot of these people aren't typically USAC events. So if the year before they weren't a USAC race and they had a perfectly good race, well, if I come in as a chief official and try to tell them a list of 15 things long that they need to change, why the hell would they want to then be a USAC race the next year? Because the bad taste they get in their mouth is, well, this guy with the blue shirt just came in and told me how to do my race that worked perfectly fine the year before. So how involved do you want me to be? And that seems to always go very well of, yeah, there's certain things I have to do. I have to provide a safe experience for those or give the safe feedbacks, but it's knowing when and when not to say things, and having those conversations up front usually helps out a lot.
To that point, Justin, I've heard that from a number of promoters that don't want to become a USA Cycling affiliated event for that very reason, that they're afraid that someone is going to come in and this is again on the mountain bike side. It's so different on the road side, that they don't want to sanction with USA Cycling because they're going to put too much on them. There's too much stuff. And part of that is I've got to have an official, and that official is going to come in and take over my event. And so that's a very, 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 very good observation that we, as USA Cycling officials, we need to make sure that our job is to get that event to continue to sanction with USA Cycling. And part of that is just exactly what you said. Just, what do you want from me? Just sit over there in the corner, score the event. I'll pay you your $125 a day and go away. And if that's what it takes to keep them on board, I think that's what we all would expect.
Yeah, Tom, that's good to mention. And I'll tell everybody, I mean, I hear from all the organizers, and really the last 3 or 4 years, the tone of organizers and actually riders as well toward officials is changed for the positive. And kudos to you all for, as we heard a couple of examples, enabling organizers to be their best And I think, enabling riders and organizers to be their best and be safe and within the rules is a lot of our mandate in what we do. And, I commiserated with Sean Farrell, who had the technical director job years ago. I think we had a much more confrontational deal between riders and officials and organizers years ago. And I think that has really changed for the positive the last few years, at least from what I've seen. So we still have issues, but on the other hand, and I think everybody brought up a good example of where officials have really helped them in the sport, and that's a great thing. So thank you all for doing that good job. And I didn't want this to come across as negative. I think it's important we hear how we're perceived out there for good and bad, and generally it's gotten much better. And I think there's a lot of respect. So kudos to all of you. So I do want to thank Tom, Adam, and Jeff for taking some time off on a Saturday to come sit down with us, and really value. I mean, these are three people I really respect in the sport, and really appreciate the amount of time you put in this morning and the thought you did. And I would ask our officials, if you see these guys out in the field, give them a, maybe one give me for being here today, but not too much, especially with Jeff. So.